All right, and it looks like we are recording. So, Judy, I'm going to let you take off. You're the expert here.
All right. Let me see if I can figure out how to get my program here started, and I'll share my screen, and hopefully I'll share the right screen. Chris, could you enable screen sharing?
Sure. Let's see. Share. Oops, share sound optimize. Let's see. I don't typically share my screen with other folks, so I'm trying to see content, PowerPoint, files.
There's a participant screen sharing.
Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to close. Whoops. We're just having
Now you're sharing your screen.
yeah, which is not what I wanted to do. There we go. You can look at the picture there. All right.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I found it on the internet. Sorry, I'd love to say I took the picture, but okay. So the thumbnail video. Good gracious. Now I got to remember how to. Well, I am just batting 1,000 today. I'm here to tell you. Okay. So, pause, disable, optimize. Let's. It's not under security, right? Allow participant. There we go. I think I got it now for you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Yeah, that sounds right. All right, so you need to stop sharing your screen, I believe.
Okay. How's that? Are we back? Because unfortunately, I can't see it as you see it, so I don't know if I'm still sharing or not. I hit stop share. So
no, I think you're good.
Okay.
And then you tell me if you see my
It's
presentation.
perfect. There we go.
All right, awesome. Yay. Well, this is just page one. I'll go ahead and get started. This is me. I am Judy Jordan. I am an account manager with a company called Reference Services, Inc. In short, we are a background screening company. So before I start talking a whole lot, I first want to state that I'm not an attorney. And so the things that I share should not in any way be construed as legal advice. My compliance team will applaud me for making that statement at the beginning of my presentation. But what I hope to do with our time together is equip you with some basics that will set you up very well to understand this small but really important part of the HR world. So whether you're working in HR or serving as an attorney in employment law, you're going to wear many hats and you're going to need to be proficient in a lot of areas of business. Chris already mentioned how many things you're learning just in these few weeks in your class. So there is a lot coming at you. So if you can just get this part figured out early in your career, and you're soon going to be an expert on background checks, then you can check this off. So background checks, got it. So let's get started. What's a background screening company? That's who we are. Well, before you hire an employee, whether it's a janitor, a CEO, a truck driver, or whether you're securing volunteers for a youth camp or a soccer league, you're going to want to run a background check. In fact, an organization has a legal and a moral obligation to know who they're hiring, to know their criminal history prior to bringing that person on board. So we're going to get into that a bit more here in a second. But so who are we as a background check company? We are a service organization. We use technology, we gather data, we schedule drug tests, we integrate with HR platforms like applicant tracking, even payroll. So there's lots of fabulous tools technology-wise. But ultimately, we are providing a service. Our clients use our software. They order background checks and drug tests, employment verifications, et cetera. And we pull all of that relevant information together and we report it back to our client. So that's kind of how we function as a background screening company. So let's get back to this topic again. So why do background checks? And we touched on it a little bit. There's a term called negligent hiring. And in a nutshell, and it's written out here on the slide, if an employee commits an act of violence and it turns out that he has a criminal history and you did not do a background check, juries in such cases will assume that if you could have known you were hiring someone dangerous or unfit for a job, then you should have known. So that's kind of the buzz phrase. If you could have known, you should have known. That's negligent hiring. And these cases have verdicts costing companies up to $40 million. In fact, average settlement is around $1 million. And here's the kicker. Employers lose most of these cases. 79% of negligent hiring cases are lost by employers. So it's important to do that background check. But there are some other very practical reasons for running background checks. You're going to improve the quality of the employees you hire. You're going to reduce turnover and reduce employee theft, et cetera. So you're just going to have a better pool of employees to choose from. All right, so we've established that it's a good idea to do background checks. Today, what I want to get into, I want to be giving you some tools via this education that could significantly reduce risk and exposure for the organizations that you're going to be working for. There are some basics in background screening that every employer should know, but honestly and truly, most do not. So why not? Well, it's often not taught in HR seminars or in business classes. And then the second reason is the background screening companies really should be educating their clients on these things that we're going to be talking about. But again, most are just not doing that. So you could very likely be hired by an organization and they are not going to have a good understanding of the things we're learning today. So be humble. You may come into an organization. The HR teams may have some understanding of these procedures and requirements, but like a executive level, CEO, C-level leadership and business owners, almost never. They've just never been exposed to these things. So once we get these things learned, you will be ready to go. All right, so what am I talking about? Well, everything that we do as a third-party background screening provider is governed by the FCRA. This is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Now, it has the word credit in it, but it doesn't cover just credit reports. In fact, and this is confusing, we are actually called a credit reporting agency, a CRA. That's the acronym. That just means a background check company, but a credit reporting agency. The FCRA applies to everything that we report: criminal records, driving history, verifications of employment or education. So not just credit reports. The reports that we provide are actually called consumer reports. And here's the connection. The FCRA protects the rights of the consumer. And in your case, and in our case, that's the applicant or the employee. So hopefully that makes sense. FCRA protects the rights of the consumer. That's your applicant. All right, so what is the big deal? Well, there are some critical points where employers get into trouble. And I say employer because unfortunately, it is the employer who is ultimately responsible for compliance. So non-compliant forms, non-compliant practices, procedures, this still falls on the employer, not the background check company. So there are some areas that I want to touch on. There are 3, and we are going to get to the adverse action process. I know that was one of the key topics to cover today. So we're going to get there. I know you're very excited about that. But there are 3 areas of litigation in this area of employment. The issues are, first of all, we talked about negligent hiring. If you're not running a background check, we've established that you need to be doing that. But if you're not running a comprehensive check, that can still get you into trouble. Case law has determined that in order to do your due diligence, you actually must be running a nationwide criminal search and county courthouse searches in every county where the individual has lived in the past 7 years. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, other than to say, know what data your background screening company is searching. They should tell you. They should be willing to share their sources. Because here's a key point. Not all background screening companies are checking the same amount of data. And the number of records searched can vary by hundreds of millions of records. And so as an employer, that's your responsibility to do a comprehensive background check. So that's the first area of litigation if you're not doing enough. The second area, you must get the permission of the applicant to run a background check. Seems simple enough, but if it's not done correctly with the right documents, you could be sued. These documents must be in compliance with the FCRA. I'm going to switch slides here and we're going to look at these required documents. And again, this stuff is simple. It's so simple, but we're also going to talk about how it can get you into a lot of hot water if it's not done right. So what are the documents I'm talking about here? You must present to your applicant before you run a background check, a disclosure, and it must be clear and conspicuous, consisting solely of that disclosure. It can contain no extraneous language or state law notices or anything confusing, and it should not include any waiving of rights. I see this quite a lot when I see the disclosure forms that employers are using. It may say something like, you're asking the applicant to sign off on this, and they're saying, I hereby release and indemnify my prospective employer, the background screening company, their agents, their employees, all parties from release of liability and any claims, blah, blah, blah. So what you're doing by putting waiver language in, you're actually asking the applicant to waive their rights on the very document that serves to protect their rights. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but you cannot ask them to waive their rights as a consumer on the disclosure document. And we see it all the time. So it has to be clear and conspicuous. That's the disclosure. The authorization form. This is also required. You must get their permission in writing to do a background check. And this authorization should be separate from your application. We see this a lot too. You'll see the application and then down at the bottom is a little paragraph. Oh yeah, by the way, I authorize a background check. FCRA says no, it has to be separate. It has to be clear and simple. So clear and simple is always the best. And then you must provide them with a copy of the summary of rights for them to keep. And so those are the documents. All right, we're finally here. One of the third areas of litigation in background screening. If you are going to turn an applicant down for a job or an employee for a promotion because of something in the background check, you have to notify them in writing. Now here on the slide is the definition of adverse action. It is formally denying an applicant based wholly or in part on the results of their background check. Now, this does not apply if they just didn't have a good interview, or they're not a good fit for your company, or they aren't qualified. Adverse action only applies when you're actually turning them down because of that background check, something that came back that influenced your decision. But the key is here, you've got to let them know in writing before you do the adverse action by turning them down. They have the right to dispute anything that is in their public record. And so that's the spirit behind this law. By notifying them in writing, giving them a copy of the background check and a copy of their rights, they have an opportunity to correct something that might be wrong or something on their record that does not belong to them. And if you don't follow these procedures, your company could be sued. So let's talk about the process. Here's how this comes up. This is how this happens. You review the background check. You're the employer. You get the background check back and you see a felony assault charge. Your team looks this over and you decide this is a disqualifier. We're not going to move forward with employment at this time with this person. So here's what you need to do. Here are the steps. And on the slide here, first you send them a pre-adverse action letter. You also send them a copy of the background check and you send them a copy of the summary of rights. And then you wait 5 days. if I'm sure you can guess why we wait 5 days. This is the opportunity for the applicant to dispute. And I'll show you this process here in just a moment where you can see the letters and the verbiage, but you're letting them know a record's been found. They are may no longer be considered for a position. You show them the background check results. And then if they do have a dispute, they reach out. But if you do not hear from them, then the law says you then send that final letter, which is the post adverse action letter. And that serves as the final notification. You're no longer going to move forward with them for the position, and you repeat the process. You send the record, the background check report, the letter, and then the summary of rights, just like you did the first time.
Is that 5 duty days?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was going to mention that. The FCRA does not actually clearly state whether it's 5 business days or 5 literal days.
Calendar days, yeah.
But the guidance that we are always taught is that you should go with the most conservative interpretation of the rule. And so in that case, we would always recommend, let's do the 5 business days.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
That'll kind of keep you out of trouble too. If you're always interpreting on the most conservative side of a rule when it's not clear.
Because
Good
there's
question.
holidays and stuff like that, and that kind of eats up at the 5 days that you have left.
Yep, that's right. And yep, that's a great point. And the FCRA says you don't have to do it at 5 days either. You could decide to wait longer. If you wanted to wait 10, you're still allowed to do that. The 5 is just a minimum.
Minimum.
Yep. What I'd like to do here, I'm going to try to juggle this. I'm going to show you our system actually. All right, do you see the RSI software screen here?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, what I did here, just real quick, I put together a test applicant, so pretend applicant, and we're just going to pretend that this person had records, and we're going to do the adverse action process. So I looked up this applicant, and I found their profile, and I expanded the view here, and it opened up a series of tabs. And I'm looking for the compliancy tab, and I'm going to add a letter. Now, I will say this letter that we're creating, these adverse action letters, these letters are the employer's letters, but we just provide the tool in our software so that they are easily accessible. And we make that easy for our clients to do. So these are going to be your letters as an employer. And so we just help you generate these. Oh, goodness. Making me sign back in. Give me just a second. Oh, actually, I don't even have to look it up. Sorry about this.
It's
who
no
would have
worse than the
access-
instructor who can't figure out how to share his screen. That's all good.
Go ahead, Chris. What were you saying?
I
So-
said it's no worse than the instructor who can't figure out how to share his screen all of a sudden. So
Yeah. Well, other Chris.
I know, sorry. I was like, Chris and Chris. So who would have access to this website? Would like the HR person that's requesting the report?
Yep,
Would
that's a
have
great
access.
question.
Okay.
Yep, this would be our clients, and you can have multiple users on the system. It's typically HR, but management, supervisors, your accounting contact can also have access to it. But yeah, typically this is where they would log in and order their reports. And then for the sake of time, I just wanted to show you quickly the adverse action. So once this report is back, their records found, you're not going to hire the person, you'd want to send the letter. And so in our system, we find it here under compliancy, and we're going to generate the letter with just a couple clicks. And we are creating the pre-adverse action letter because we haven't done any adverse action yet. And we'll take a look at this. The system populates everything automatically. So it's going to pull in the applicant's name and address and all of the verbiage in the letter. So basically this letter is saying, in connection with your application for employment, you authorized your employer to perform a background check. and your application is currently under review, and you may be eliminated from further consideration based on the information received from, and here's the consumer reporting agency, that's the background check company, listed below. And so it tells them you have the right to dispute the accuracy of the information. And then we actually have them reach out to us directly. And it is our obligation to the FCRA to reinvestigate whenever there is a dispute. I'll talk a little bit about this too. One of the things at RSI that we do, we actually verify every criminal record hit that we find. So we have real people looking at it and making sure that it belongs to the applicant. We check the name, spelling, and the location, and we just make sure that it's actually correct before we send it back to our client. And as a result, we are very accurate, and we don't get very many of these disputes. But when we do, and we do get them, it is our obligation to reinvestigate and make sure that's cleared up. But they are directed to contact us. And then here in the letter, it says, we give you 5 days to provide any information or dispute if you have any questions. And then the next part of the requirement is that you send them a copy of that background check. And so they'll be able to see the records that were found. And then you are also required to send a copy of the summary of rights. And this summary of rights is a standard document. It gives them different information. There's information in here about your credit score, about disputing incomplete or inaccurate information. It talks to them even about identity theft and steps they can take. So it's a document that should go to the applicant for their records. But that's the pre-adverse action letter. And then basically that post-adverse action letter, you would come back into the system and under Adverse Action Manager, and you can find that pre-adverse action stage. And after 5 days, you could go back in and generate the second letter. And the system is telling me, hey, it hasn't been 5 days, but I know that. We're just pretending. But we'll create the post-adverse action letter. And you can see it auto-populates everything just like the first letter, but this time it's a little different. It's referencing the first letter that was sent by the company on this date and time of the preliminary decision to eliminate you from consideration. We gave you 5 days to review the report and provide any corrected information. And basically this letter serves to notify you that we're not going to be moving forward with employment at this time. Again, they are directed to contact us. They still have the right to dispute or reach out for information. And you just repeat the process, the background check, and then the summary of rights. Any questions on that? Okay. The other nice thing about the system too here, and again, other companies may or may not have these types of features. They may very well. But what's nice is that when you look up this applicant in the future, and somebody asks you, did you do the adverse action process? You can say, absolutely, we did. You go back to that compliancy tab, and you can see that this user in the system posted the pre-adverse action letter on this date and time, and they sent the post-adverse action on this date and time. And so you are in compliance and you have a record of having done things correctly.
So now, Judy, I have a quick question for you. I noticed on the system, and I use this system, and Chris, I will tell you that she is not lying. This, if I logged into my system, it would look very much the same. Only it would have real candidates. So I don't want to share that information, obviously, but this is what the system looks like. I like RSI. It's a very in-depth process. But back to my original question before I go off on a tirade. It says that you can send it by email or mail. Do you have a preference? I mean, do you have a recommendation for our students?
Yeah, we still recommend sending it truly in a hard copy through the mail. You're very welcome to also email it. You can certainly do both. It's just so easy for somebody to say, oh, I never got the email, or I changed emails, or it got deleted. So just, again, just kind of erring on the side of being more conservative, we still recommend mailing these letters out.
That makes
And typically, we mail our certified. Is that still current practice, or has that changed?
Yep, that's still a good practice. In fact, in our system, there's this documents tab, and you can actually upload documents. And many of our clients will upload that certified mail receipt. So everything is right there in one spot. We don't recommend sending it like with signature required or anything, because it's not necessary and it can really kind of bog things down. So certified is great. It just gives you that additional layer of protection.
Perfect.
Good question. All right, I'm going to try to go back to my presentation here, and we will keep moving forward. All right, so here's the thing. No one is out there looking for non-compliant forms and procedures. There's no form police out there. They're not going to knock on your door and say, can we see your adverse action letters? So here's what's happening. Here's an example. You turn somebody down for a job because of a felony drug charge, but the background screening company reported records that did not belong to your applicant. They had the wrong guy. And you didn't send a copy of the report to the applicant, so he doesn't know. And then he gets disgruntled, rightfully so, gets a lawyer, and you can bet that they are going to be reviewing every document and procedure with a fine-tooth comb. And they're going to ask about the disclosure. Did you have waiver language in the disclosure? Was the authorization form confusing or connected to the application? By the way, did you notify the applicant in writing? Did you do that adverse action process, giving the opportunity to dispute their background check? And so that is kind of how that evolves. Now, I've got some logos up here on my screen, and I am not picking on any of these companies, but I'm going to just talk through some of the cases that are out there. And you can Google any of these. This is just public information. But these employers have gotten hit with FCRA lawsuits for not being in compliance with the very things we've just talked about. Frito-Lay, a $1 million class action settlement because they did not send that adverse action letter out. They didn't give notification prior to taking adverse action. Lowe's, they are currently facing an FCRA class action lawsuit. In this case, the defendant was turned down for a job because of a record, but he was not given a copy of the report nor a copy of the summary of rights. Had he seen the report prior to the adverse action, he could have explained that he does not, in fact, have a felony record. Again, the background company had a bad background check. They had the wrong guy, but Lowe's did not send out that adverse action letter and a copy of the report. So now they're facing this lawsuit. There are a lot of violations with the disclosure. Whole Foods, $800,000 class action settlement because their disclosure was not clear and conspicuous, and it contained liability waivers, asking the applicant to waive their rights. You can't have that in there. This was a big one. Publix, $6.8 million class action settlement. You might think, how in the world do you get to 6.8 million? Well, here's the thing. You're probably familiar with class action lawsuits. One person, their rights are violated, and they begin that process of litigation. Well, then the lawyers say, well, if anybody who was ever hired by this company or background checked by this company, join our class action lawsuit. And so this class action lawsuit with Publix, there were 90,000 plus members in the class. So they had done a lot of hiring and a lot of background checks, and they weren't doing them correctly. Apparently, in their case, they had an authorization on the screen of a kiosk where people were applying for jobs. And it had a whole lot of extra information that violated the FCRA, their standalone disclosure requirement. So they just did not do it correctly. And boy, that was expensive. Swift Transportation, 4.4 million class action for both violating adverse action procedures and improper disclosures. Chuck E. Cheese was another one with the disclosure. It was buried in their application somewhere and had all kinds of extraneous language and information. Home Depot, there are several here. Food Lion, $3 million. This one, they had an employee actually working for them before the background check completed, but when that background check came back, it said she was a convicted felon, which was not correct. They had the wrong person. And then they reviewed all of the documents and determined that, oh, the disclosure was not, in proper format. It wasn't clear and conspicuous. And by the way, they did not get her authorization in writing to do a background check. So you can, Google these. All you have to do is Google FCRA background check lawsuit, and there are hundreds of cases. So you can see here, kind of as a conclusion, it's extremely important for your background screening company to be accurate. I mentioned that order review process. It's just so important to not depend on just data filters, but actually have real people looking at the records. And then most of all, just that you have the tools in place for compliance. You can see this stuff is not complicated. It's not rocket science. It's very simple, but if you've never been taught, then how are you to know? So hopefully this will be very valuable for you. Again, it's just a small part of everything that you're learning. You're definitely drinking out of a fire hose. And so I just wish you all well, and I hope this has been helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Judy.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Chris, do you have any questions?
So how are the searches being done? Is it by social or by the full name? Because there's so many like common names, like John Smith, there's probably 1,000 or 1,000,000 of them. So I mean, I'm just wondering how you were getting the wrong record on people, and turns out that they're not,
Yeah.
So how is that being conducted?
Yep, that's a great question. Yeah, when we are verifying records, of course, we ask our clients to enter in a first name and a last name. Those are required fields. And we ask for any information on a middle name, even if it's just an initial, that still helps us. But a full middle name is helpful. We will ask for that address and then date of birth and the social. We also run a social security trace, which will reveal the address history for the person. And so when you take all of that into consideration, if a record comes back as a match, our team will look at all of the identifiers, and we need to have, I believe it is at least 3 identifiers that are a confirmed match. So if it's first name, last name, date of birth, all of that needs to match up in order to be verified as a clear record and report that back. And many times you will see there are records that come back, but it's just not a good match. We don't have all of the identifiers that we need to clear it, and we will remove it, and we don't send that back to our client.
Okay, that makes sense.
Good question.
So, if for example, I'm a new HR guy and I want to screen my candidates and stuff. Can I just have them do the background when I'm doing the interview? Is that a good practice, or how do we have to do that?
Yep, that's another really good question. It is considered a best practice to intend to make the offer, or to actually make the offer contingent on the background check. So it would not be considered a best practice to run background checks on everybody, and then based off that, you choose which one you want to hire. That's kind of backwards. The EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they would say you make that offer contingent upon the clear background check.
Thank you. And then lastly, unless Chris has other questions or something, but as you had mentioned, there are literally hundreds of different consumer reporting agencies out there. If you were a new HR professional, what are a couple, three things that you would recommend that they look for when they're visiting with these vendors? Because I'll be honest, I get calls still today all the time, from different agencies. So it's always nice to know what I should be looking for.
Yep. Great question. Probably one of the first places to start to kind of narrow down the field. There are thousands of companies out there. I'd say probably 2,000 or 3,000 companies out there selling background checks. There is a governing body in our industry called the Professional Background Screeners Association, PBSA, and accreditation with that organization is something that you should look for. A company that is accredited. I think currently there are probably around 120 companies, that's it, that are accredited. So you go from thousands of companies selling these services down to 100. You still got a ways to go. A couple attributes to really take into consideration. I mentioned criminal record data. Make sure they're sharing their sources. Criminal records are not stored in one big database. They're all over the place. So understand where those records are coming from. We have 1.2 billion records collectively in our nationwide. And, a company should have that number or you're going to be missing records. The other thing that we do, we do allow for some partial matches of name spelling, dates of birth, because numbers and digits can be transposed and we don't want to miss anything. But we have that human order review. And so that keeps us from reporting false positives. And so with the most data, the wide parameters to capture everything that's out there, and then that order review process that verifies, that combination is ideal. And then the other huge portion of this is customer service. And I know it's one of those things that companies just have, we have the best customer service. Put them to the test. Your background screening company should be a partner. I mentioned that we are a service organization, and we really are. I mean, anybody can crunch data and spit out information, and they can sell a background check for $10. But that's not what you're getting, with a good service company in background screening. You should be able to call them, get information, get help, and have that relationship that you need in this industry.
So when you said that they have 5 days to dispute anything in the record, is that through you guys, the servicing background company, or through the company they're applying for, or the county where they lived where that supposed bad record showed up, or how does that work?
Yeah, that letter that we looked at does direct them to the background screening company.
Okay.
Now, many times the applicant will call the employer just because that's who they have the relationship with and that's who they've been talking to. And they're like, hey, but then the employer, we always let them know, just tell us, if somebody calls. If somebody does contact us with a dispute, we immediately reach out to the client and we let them know that a case has been opened, and then we go to work. As I mentioned, that's our obligation under the FCRA, and that's to reinvestigate. So, we will help verify, if the record does not actually belong or it does, whatever the case may be, and we'll make sure that's cleared up.
Okay, that makes sense.
Good question.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Judy, thank you. I appreciate your time today. You've given us a lot of good information, and I think that I appreciate you taking your time this afternoon, because this is it. Like you said, it's important. And your last slide, other than the comic, which I thought was hilarious, but those companies, those are big companies. You would think that they probably have a corporate compliance and a corporate legal team that should be monitoring that to help HR, and they're not. So and most HR departments are a department of one or two,
Exactly.
You know, so like you said, this is not something that's typically shared in business classes or HR classes. So it's some good information, and I appreciate you taking the time to share that today.
Well, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure, and hope it's been helpful. And Chris, it's nice to meet you. I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording here. Let's see.